So we've been going through our text on mind training, and we've got to my favorite part. I was reflecting on this at a little time, and while in my own life I don't have any great wisdom, insight, or spiritual attainment of any sort, for whatever reason, this particular verse I was able to embrace early on. One of the first teachings I received from Venerable Geshe Sultan Gelsen was on this text, and this stuck. And so anything that has helped me in my life, there's a certain aspect of attribution for whatever reason this made sense to me, and I have even just a taste of it has provided me many years of reduced mental afflictive states. And it's really quite straightforward. Maybe that's why I got it. And the wording on it here in this text is blame everything on one thing. Blame everything on one thing. You'll hear it as banish the one to blame for everything. But here, blame everything on one thing. So we had, in our last teaching, really identified the real chief source of our suffering, this self-cherishing attitude. We've identified it, we've made it clear, we see how it gives rise to suffering. And so now it's time to banish that. So blame, and now we actually have something to blame. That's cool, huh? Everybody tells you, yeah, don't blame, get in the solution. Well, okay, I've got something to blame. Blame everything on one thing. Makes it very simple. The next verse instructs us to blame everything bad that happens to us, from tragedy to ingrown toenails, on one thing alone: self-centeredness. This is a very powerful antidote to a very natural tendency. When we experience misfortune, we almost invariably look outward and say, who did this to me? If we identify the perpetrator, myriad mental distortions arise in response. Another person may well have acted as a cooperative condition contributing to our unhappiness, but that person is not the real cause. So this is sort of the fundamental misperception that drives so much of our mental and emotional suffering in life, is we really think the source of our suffering is someone out there. If only they would act differently. If only that next job would be different. If only this. If only that. And it's such a great sales pitch. If only. If only I got that job where, I would have security, then it would be good. If only, I had that person in my life, that person, then I could be happy. If only, it's a pretty good sales pitch. Maybe we could do commercials. If only, then we would have this. And it keeps arising. It keeps arising. If only, then I would be happy. And when we look at things a little more accurately, we start to see that that's really not the case. The source of my happiness and suffering, the source is not out there. The cause of my suffering is not out there, mental and emotional suffering. And if we can really grasp that, that alone really shifts our whole ability to perceive reality and engage in a life of Dharma practice and reduce suffering. But as long as I keep thinking that if they were different, or if that was different, or that I would suffer less, that they're the cause, then we're fighting a battle based in misperception that's just not going to, we're just going to lose. We're going to lose a lot. And we're going to really try our very best to arrange that whole outer world and universe in ways that's going to make my life a little bit better. And that is a recipe for mental and emotional suffering. And it arises from self-cherishing. I want to feel better, so I want you to buck up and act right. And if you start treating me the way I deserve, well, then I feel like I deserved, and it's okay. And it's pretty hard to micromanage everybody, just for the record. It takes a little effort. It's not easy. It's just not easy. I mean, your own partner, your family. I mean, anybody raise kids here? Yeah, good luck. You know, how's that working? And so we have this idea that, you know, that's the blame and that's the cause. And it's investigating here. We've gone through this for some weeks, and we've really started to notice that is not the cause. Now, is that a cooperative condition? Yes. Someone coming in and into our lives can be a cooperative condition that helps give rise to my mental and emotional suffering. But the source is not out there. And we're going to explore that a little bit more. I love reading this section of the book because he gives some great examples. And one of my favorite lines, so I'm just not attached, though. You know, it's funny. People want to tell us Buddhist jokes, huh? We go somewhere and says, hey, I got a joke for you. Yeah. What was the one today? It was, so why couldn't the guy get the... Couldn't the Buddhist vacuum the carpet or whatever? So in the corner, he couldn't get the dirt off. Why couldn't the Buddhist get the dirt out of the corner of the couch? Yeah, no attachments. Yeah, no attachments, right? Yeah. And then you go, oh, yeah, that's funny. You got that. And the one that's just most common, everyone, it's like, what the Buddhist, say when he ordered a hot dog. Some people say, what did the Dalai Lama say? They'll say, make me one with everything, right? And you're like, yeah. Maybe pretty soon there'll be more than 3. I don't know, but it'll be good. We're looking forward to number 4. Yeah. But it's fun to view with that. So here we go. He made this point, the last sentence here. Another person may well have been a cooperative condition that contributed to our unhappiness, but it's not the real source. On the deepest level, we can take karma into account. We are ultimately responsible for our present circumstances. And for the future, we are creating right now in each action of body, speech, and mind. So on this very deep level, if we take this into account, we can explain it this way. But we are responsible on another level, also which can be helpful to consider. And this is something that can be a little more practical for us. Imagine, for example, that someone drives into my car and puts a dent into it. Okay, I'm imagining that. Left rear corner panel. In this particular instance, I'm blameless. My car was stationary. I can target the person who did it, and that person seems truly to blame for my suffering. The dent in my nice new car. I didn't visualize that part. Nice new car, dent. But remember how, earlier in that text, our enemies first appeared when we approached them in the practice of taking and sending. We have isolated this person. It is a sure bet that I am looking at the person who dented my car as an intrinsic, autonomous entity. And in this way, I feed the fires of my indignation and self-righteousness. So that's a reference to understanding that that person I'm identifying, I kind of stick a label. That's how they are. This is who they are. That's how they exist. And I forget that there's a lot of causes and conditions that gave rise to how they were treated, how they were raised, and how I'm perceiving them in that moment. And we start understanding that this person is not an independent, self-existent being that just shows up on their own without causes and conditions, right? How they were raised, the conditions they were raised in, the sufferings they had to do, the people, and how I'm perceiving them It's got a lot to do with how I was raised and the conditions that I was brought up in, whether I had trauma when I was younger, when I had a supportive environment and so forth. That how I'm perceiving someone's always this interdependent play of everyone else around us, the environments we came up in, how I'm perceiving them, whether or not I had enough sleep last night. Is all at play. It's not that they're just a jerk. It's that based on a lot of different things in that moment, things are coming together in a particular way. And however I label that person, that label won't fit everything, will it? You know, that person's going to be a lot of things, just like I'm a lot of things at different times. So I'm saying, so we want to get past that and understand that this person arose in that way. Sometimes if it's an accident, could have been mindless, could have been receiving a phone call that their kid is in the hospital and distracted, could be in a hurry somewhere, could have been just mindless because they were doing something else. Who knows? But he's making a point that I can identify, I'm blameless, they hit my car was stationary. I actually have a real life example. The Flaming Gorge, it's a pass, right? Coming down from Wyoming into Colorado, the Flaming Gorge. Big mountain pass. I was once there in snow, and my truck could not make it over the pass because I only had 2 good tires. I had a 57 Chevy truck. It was red, white rim tires. 2 good ones, 2 not so good. And we're stuck on the side of the road waiting for a snowplow because we can't go any further. So we're hundreds of miles from anywhere. On the side of the road, we're outside the truck, and we're percolating some coffee, waiting for a snowplow. Out of nowhere, a car comes around the turn, loses control, and slams into my truck. It was pretty surreal. You're just out in nowhere, a car out of nowhere. I mean, how's it going to find another car to hit? Not easy. Loses control, slams into my truck. My truck wasn't very hurt. It was a 57 Chevy with a big bumper. We go over, check on them. They were not very clear and scattered. I wasn't sure what happened. And, eventually police came and we got them taken care of. And it weren't too hurt, but it seemed like it had some episode. And then funny thing, I got a ticket. My truck was out of registration. So, who's the cause of my suffering? I was just minding my own business, sitting on the side of the road, and somebody out of nowhere, hit my truck. So he's saying, what's the issue here? Well, let's look at this more accurately. Was I at fault in this particular context, the hitting the car? Both the law, and in my case, I did break the law, so I actually deserved the ticket, so I digressed on that point. Was I at fault in this particular context? Both the law and my insurance company would say, no, I'm not. Someone has damaged a possession of mine, and I have no freedom to choose whether or not I experience this particular circumstance. On a deep level, I have stacked the cards to my experience through my own previous actions. So that's where my karma and my predispositions, my tendencies have already been stacked. So what's happening, how this happens, I got no control over. It's already done. But here lies the freedom. How do I respond? The dent in the car has no power to cause me any suffering unless I yield to it. The dent is only an external catalyst, a contributing circumstance. But by itself, it is not sufficient to cause me suffering. Right? Somebody dented a car. What are the added ingredients that cause me suffering? Well, first of all, I had to possess the car. If I had to buy a car, I have to have a car. Watching someone drive into another person's car doesn't have the same impact on me. Hey, Steve, sorry, man, somebody dented your car. Now it's like, somebody dented my car? Wait, it's suddenly different. At a minimum, the suffering requires a person to drive into the car that has to be driven into, and my possession of the car, so all that has to happen. But all this is still insufficient for the suffering to arise in my mind. We have the ingredients for a cake, but no oven. The suffering actually arises from the stuff of my own mind. If I were mindless, there'd be no suffering, but that's not an option. I cannot decide to reject my mind. It's going to be present. Instead, I must apply my intelligence. What element of my mind is responsible for my suffering? So if I'm watching somebody hit a car, it's not a big deal. They hit my car, now it's a big deal. Where's the mental suffering come from? Yeah, that's my car, and I don't want my car to be dented. But without that piece, I'm just observing a car getting dented. Now, I could approach that a lot of different ways, right? I have a car. I didn't get hurt. I wasn't in the car. Nobody else was hurt. Those are all different potentials that arise. But the thing that really gets frustrating is coming from me, not the events. And fundamentally, in this next sentence, the real source of my suffering is my self-centeredness. My car, my possession, my well-being. Without self-centeredness, the suffering would not arise. What would happen instead? It is important to imagine this fully and to focus on examples of your own. Think of some misfortune that makes you want to lash out, that gives rise to anger or misery. And then imagine how you might respond without suffering. Recognize that we need not experience the misery, let alone the anger, the resentment, and the hostility. The choice is ours. So in our own lives, a real practical way of engaging in this is when anger arises, when my resistance to what's happening is coming, when things aren't going my way, and how I would, how I react. What would happen if I asked myself, what's the most beneficial way to react? What's the healthiest thing to do here for the most people concerned? As opposed to the way I want it. Somebody hits my car. What's the healthy thing to do? Go yell at them? Is that going to help anything in any way, shape, or form? Or is it to go check on them and go, hey, are you okay? And I'm sure none of us have hit anybody else's car, right? I've hit a few. It's that person who cuts somebody off on a freeway. Like, I've never done that, And I'm sure some of us are guilty of driving erratically at times, maybe not being fully attentive. And I'm going to leave it at that, because we can fill in how we weren't fully attentive in many ways. But when somebody else does it, I can get angry. What if we asked ourselves, whatever's happening, what's the most beneficial way to respond for most people concerned? Instead of, what do I need to give up, or how can I get it to go my way, or how can I get this to go the way I would like it to go? Because that's where the suffering is. But you're not going to find very much suffering when, the analogy I like to use is there is no peace that's found in attending to the needs of me and mine. You will find it in attending to we and ours. When I see myself as interconnected, as dependent upon all the causes and conditions, others, and everyone in my life, that's given rise to who I am today and how I'm experiencing life, then I'm tending to a much bigger picture, and you're not going to have that struggle. But when it's me and mine and how I think it ought to be, now I've got the oven, and we can bake a cake of resentment and anger and frustration and self-righteousness and indignation. But without the me and mine, they're just conditions. The real source is coming from here. It's not out there. Anger is here, not out there. Resentment's here, it's not out there. Fear and insecurity, it's here, it's not out there. And we keep pointing out there and going, if that would be different, this would be different. But if this is different, all of that's totally different. And the root cause is my own self-importance of me being more important than everybody else. And fundamentally, we really buy into that. I mean, I can hear your problems, feel bad for you and all that. And I'll still be self-obsessed at the same time. Glad it didn't happen to me. You know, me. It's a very strong thing. So he's going to go on with this previous example. So let's continue with this example. You see that there's a dent in the car. What needs to be done? Get the other driver's license number, notify the police, contact the insurance agency, deal with all the details. Simply do it and accept it. Accept it gladly as a way to strengthen your mind further, to develop patience and the armor of forbearance. I'm going to pause there because my line's coming up. Now, from a Buddhist perspective, and I think just from a logical human being perspective, everything that happens to us is an opportunity to improve, right? I mean, is there any event in your life that's ever happened to you that did not provide an opportunity for you to become stronger, more wise, more caring, more compassionate, more patient, more tolerant? Is there anything that ever happens to us ever that is not an opportunity to improve who we are and how we live in the world? If you find it, let me know. I haven't found one yet. From a Buddhist perspective, everything that's happening has one purpose: to help me enlighten and awaken my mind, my highest potentials, to cultivate compassion, wisdom, and clarity in my life, everything that's happened. So why would I be mad at the cause for my enlightenment? It's kind of an awkward thing. So if I start to see that everything that is happening is an opportunity to develop these highest potentials within myself, to see more clearly, to see how things arise, and watch that. Well, now there's a big shift that happens. Forbearance is the word he used, forbearance. In the next sentence, wait for it. He says it in different ways sometimes, but I like this. There's no way to become a Buddha and remain a vulnerable wimp. Okay. You ever heard him say, this is not for wusses, okay? This is not for wusses. This is to really stand up, buck up, and face life as it's happening. And not to run and hide and stick our head in the sand. Life is a big, messy place. Samsara is not designed to make our lives pleasurable. And we keep thinking it will, somehow, some way. And it actually takes forbearance. It takes some guts. It takes a bit of grit to awaken our minds. It doesn't happen as we're sitting on the jacuzzi having the next latte. It could, I don't know, if you did all the other hard work first, but fundamentally, it takes work and effort, and it takes a very strong dedication to observing our own mental afflictions and noting where they're coming from and not blaming others. And a lot of people don't want to do that. And so it takes some inner strength, some resolve to say, hey, I am here. I am here, rooted firmly in reality, and I'm showing up to make the best possible use of this life. Yeah, not for wusses. Yeah. I have a friend, Dusty, who runs, they're watching online maybe, the Here and Now Center. He named it the Here and Now Center. He says, man, it's hard to get people at Here and Now Center. They have tough competition with the then and there center. Because everybody else wants to be then and there. But to be here and now is to be fully present with what's happening and really make an effort to engage with what's happening in ways that are meaningful and constructive. There's no way to become a Buddha and remain a vulnerable wimp. Patience does not suddenly appear as a bonus after full enlightenment. Part of the whole process of awakening is to develop greater forbearance and equanimity in adversity. Shantideva, in the 6th chapter of the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, eloquently points out that there is no way to develop patience without encountering adversity. And patience is indispensable for our own growth on the path of awakening. So that's just true, okay? I mean, is that not true? How are you going to develop patience without adversity? And we need patience to really engage in any endeavor. Fundamentally, without patience, there's almost nothing that you will ever really become a master at, right, in life. Whatever it is, playing an instrument, driving a car, doing whatever, we need patience. To be in a healthy relationship, need patience. Anything. And patience only comes from having to work with some adversity. That's how we develop it. To learn to be okay being uncomfortable. So this is just the way it is, and we may know that, we may agree with it, and then we may walk out of here and try to do everything in our possible being to avoid adversity at any level. Right? I mean, just think about all the different types of things you have to be comfortable in your life. I was teaching a workshop the other day, and these guys were talking about the latest lumbar support in their new car. And this other guy's thinking how he needs to get one of those with his lumbar support in the new car. And you start thinking about all of these things to have us sit in a certain way or be a certain way, and all of this stuff. And boy, what a recipe for suffering. Because when you don't have that lumbar support, or somebody else has it, or the heated seats, or the not heated seats, or all that stuff, and fundamentally you forget that you can be quite comfortable, and you were once quite comfortable, in an old Volkswagen that had, heat that came through the floorboards, and you were pretty darn happy to have it. I did rain on their parade and tell them, if you roll up a towel and you put it here, you're going to have a really nice firm lumbar support, and you don't even need a new car. You know what he told me? Don't tell my wife that. She's this close to saying yeah, So, this is our nature, though, right? We'll want all of that, and we'll keep trying to do all of that out there so I can feel just a moment of less suffering. And what we're actually doing is creating more suffering. It's a trap, and it's just prevalent. So if we understand, though, that when things are challenging, the freedom that he talked about, the freedom is how we respond. Okay, I have no power over this has now happened, whatever this is. And the quicker I can get to that acceptance that this has happened, I have the potential to use that as an opportunity to improve it. But you may note that when this happens, there's going to be a long time between getting to a solution and rumination and worry and self-justification, self-righteousness, how that shouldn't have happened. There can be a long, and how wrong that was. And that is all an incredible habit and tendency that creates nothing but suffering. We're looking for someone to blame. I don't feel happy. Who's to blame? This happened. I'm upset. Who's to blame? What's to blame? How can we change all of that so I can feel okay? When feeling okay is always here, it's just cluttered with all that elaborative process and self-cherishing about how I want things to be different than they are. When I accept things as they are, I can do something about them. And I can actually grow from them. So the real freedom becomes I can respond instead of react. I can say, this has happened, and let me address the real cause of my suffering, which is how I'm relating to it. And I can change. And if I start planting different seeds in my life, different things will arise in the future. So right now I have a garden to tend to that we call a rare and precious human rebirth. And every moment throughout the day, I can tend my garden of this incredibly rare and precious human rebirth. I can water the seeds of patience, compassion, tolerance, wisdom, forbearance. Or I can water the seeds of self-justification, resentment, anger, blame, resentment, frustration. What do I want to water? Because what I water grows. And if we go to the analogy of a garden, by habitual nature, we tend to water the weeds of our garden instead of the flowers of wisdom and compassion that actually give rise to inner peace and well-being. It's much easier to water anger. It's much easier to water discontent, dissatisfaction, desire, attachment. We're very easy to do. Weeds grow easily. Some of the flowers take some nurturing. And so the conditions that arise, let's say the fertilizer, sticking with the garden. You'd almost think I'm a gardener by the way I'm talking. My wife can attest to the fact I'm not a gardener. But I hear that you need fertilizer. And the fertilizer is probably not something you'd really like personally. It could even be a little shitty, I hear. So, but that gives rise to the nutrients. And likewise, adversity gives rise to cultivating, patience, forbearance, the real flowers of our mental continuum. That's the nutrients. That's the stuff that gives rise. And so if we start to understand that, rather than see that as something to keep out of our garden, we actually, it's coming in. Let's spread it around. Let's make good use of it. And let's create something with this. And now I have freedom. I have freedom because I've realized that fundamentally, guess what? I am not the center of the universe. And man, it's so hard to be the center of the universe. I mean, if there wasn't over 7 billion others, it might be easier, but you're outnumbered from the gate. And all of those people think they're the center of the universe. And we just keep bumping into each other. And that's where this suffering comes from. So blame everything on one thing, my self-cherished attitude, because without that oven, that cake doesn't get baked. That's the real cause. That's the real actual cause. And for those of you who haven't been here before, I know we have some new faces, we define cause differently than conditions. Okay, so he talked about a causal condition, something, a catalyst, which is different than a cause. So in a technical term, a cause has to be of the same stuff, the same nature. For something to, like the analogy we usually use is a tree or a plant. The cause for a tree is the seed of a tree, right? The seed gives rise. It becomes a tree. It's the same stuff, and then it becomes a sprout, and then it becomes a trunk, and then it has leaves. It becomes a tree, then it gives other seeds, but it's all the same stuff. The real cause for a tree is the seed. It's the same stuff. Now, the conditions that give rise to the tree are the soil, the nutrients, the sun, the water, and all that. But you can have all that and no seed. There's no tree. Okay, it's the same stuff. Everything else around it is a contributing condition, an environment, a condition that can help give rise for that seed to grow. Well, so if we look at mental afflictive states, anger, resentment, jealousy, frustration, the stuff of that is mental. Right? It's not out there. The seeds of anger, resentment, and jealousy are in my consciousness. The causes are always here. Outside are the conditions that can give rise to those seeds to grow. But no seed, no oven, It doesn't happen. It can have all the conditions. And so how I respond to what's happening is planting a seed. If I don't want to have an angry, overbearing boss, I want to stop creating the conditions to experience an overbearing boss. I change, not them. And then someday you're going to go to work and you don't have that overbearing boss. And the fascinating thing is, it might still be the same person. But now I don't have an overbearing boss. It changed. What changed? What changed is I stopped creating the conditions to have such a boss, to experience them in that way. And we can create those seeds, cultivate those seeds by how we respond to what's ever happened. Everything that's happening now is helping me create my future experience. What's happening now, I've already planted those seeds. That's what he was saying. Those cards have been played. You know, somebody hit my car on. It's amazing I can remember. I can't remember it now. What's that pass? The Flaming Gorge. I was 18 years old. Yeah. Those things happen. This thing happens. These things happen. Those conditions have been created, and now they've happened. Now I can lament all day long. They've still happened. And now that they've happened, I have the ability to create my future by how I respond. The freedom lies there to see more accurately, to recognize that whatever's happening, I can ask a different question. What's the healthiest way to respond? What's the most beneficial way to respond? What's the way to respond that's going to make good use of this rare and precious life that I have now? And all of that is giving me rise to create the best potentials as I continue in my life. So I'm creating my life day to day in the future by how I respond today. What's happened in the past, give rise now. And so if we start to understand that, who's to blame for how I experience life? How I was mistreated when I was younger, is that to blame? No, that's a causal condition. And there were lots of environments and things that created those conditions, including how my parents were raised and the suffering they had to go through and the different difficulties and all that, and cultures that we're all raised in and all that stuff. I mean, there's all these conditions that gave rise. But how I experience it gave rise to who I am in this moment now. And so those varying troubled events, whatever they were once, by whatever those things are, created all the conditions for me to see clearly in this moment, to be on a path of awakening, to make the highest use of our rare and precious human rebirth. That's what played out. And now I have this. And so all of the events, so 32 years ago I started living differently using this type of analogy. And what I have noticed is that even though there's still been challenges and difficulties and ups and downs, my experience of the world has changed dramatically. And the person that was 32 years ago obviously is not the same person today, nor are any of you. But what would happen if we spent 32 years trying to respond to what's happening with that different question of, what's the best thing to do for the most people here, instead of, what do I want to have happen? How would your life be different? How much less suffering might there be, and what seeds are being cultivated to how we experience things? So if we don't want annoying people, overbearing people, jerky people in our lives, it's fascinating. You should stop creating the karma to experience annoying and jerky people in your lives. And then people aren't so annoying anymore. And they don't necessarily change much. But we change the experience of how we perceive them. Because that's how karma works. Our personal karma is always planting seeds of pleasurable or unpleasurable or sort of neutral seeds that give rise to whether I experience someone, something, some event as a pleasurable, unpleasurable, and neutral, and a variance of that. It's how I experience them. How I see. And so as we cultivate these really ripe seeds of compassion and kindness and clarity, we're watering seeds that are pleasurable, to see things and people and experience events in ways that are more pleasurable and less afflicted. Less painful is more accurate. Less painful. So the real cause for finding someone annoying or finding someone pleasant has less to do with the person and more to do with you. Does that make sense? And the thing is, you've already planted those seeds. But as you change, then you can experience more annoying people or more pleasant people. And the world they don't need to change as much. I experience them differently. So, food delicious, people pleasant, unpleasant. And so that's why people in very adverse situations can experience the world quite joyfully. So everything that's happening is an opportunity for us to grow. And who's planting the seeds? Banish or blame. The way I was taught, I'm stuck with the old phrase. So I'm going with this text. Blame everything on one thing, my self-cherishing attitude. Because I'm planting the seeds. I planted the seeds to experience things. Now, that does not mean, just to be clear, I didn't create somebody denting my car. I didn't do all that. How I experience somebody denting my car, that I'm responsible for. Right? Because there's a lot of karmas involved, People made the cars, the other people driving the cars, the roads, there's a whole bunch of stuff, karmas that came together where a car gets hit. I'm not to blame for all that. But how I experience that, and you'll notice how sometimes an event happens in your life and it's not a big deal. And then something very small happens, like someone mistreats you or talks to you in a particular way, and that's a big freaking deal. The events themselves are not the thing. How I'm experiencing them is. And so I'm constantly creating the karmic imprints, the seeds that give rise to these mental states. And so we can see everything. The real freedom here is that everything that's happening is an opportunity to plant the seeds that give rise to awakening. So I'm responsible. So if I'm to blame, and by I'm not talking about this physical body. I'm talking about this mentally afflicted state of John that is just wanting, it's like a little out of control teenager, looking for the new shiny all the time and judging everybody and everything and comparing himself to everyone and everything. That's just always here looking for that. And who's got that? And are they like that? And are they cool or not cool? Are they like me, not like me? It's like this little out of control teenager who's insecure, trying to be a cool kid, doesn't feel cool, and looking for stuff and wants to be entertained. And when things don't go their way, what do they quickly do? Well, Jimmy did it like that. That's the blame. The actual the something that we can more accurately identify with, is much more than our mentally afflicted states. Those come and go. But there's something much more present here that we can identify with more accurately. The awareness that's always present, that notices the crazy nonsense that's going on. And that's going to be around a lot longer. And so we don't get caught up in that misperception of self, that self-cherishing attitude. And that self-cherishing attitude is always wrapped into a little ego that's John, like a little out-of-control teenager. It's a great analogy because it seems to fit. And it's only interested in itself. It's only interested in itself. And the thing about an ego like that is it doesn't even matter if it's depression or wallowing or whining. As long as it's about me, it's on. That mind will say, it's all about me. You see how they're mistreating me? I'm so bad. I'm this. I. And And so that's what we're working with here is let's start blaming the real cause of our suffering on a self-cherishing attitude that's wrapped around a self that doesn't actually exist intrinsically from its own side. It's a bunch of mentally afflicted states that don't purport to how things actually operate in the world. And more accurately, everything that's happening is an opportunity to cultivate wisdom and freedom from that self-cherishing, self-obsessed, maniacal, afflicted ego that is grasping to entertainment and self. Let's go ahead and do a dedication now to dedicate the merit and wisdom that we've accumulated here today prior to engaging in a potluck festivities. Let us dedicate the merit and wisdom that we have accumulated here today and throughout our lives for the benefit of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings be free of suffering and find lasting happiness. And may we be able to use the merit and wisdom accumulated here today and throughout our lifetimes to purify our own minds, to tend our gardens well, to cultivate the seeds of an awakening mind so that we can achieve full enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. All right, thank you all so much. Be well. Try to stay out of trouble, and we'll see you soon. And thanks for joining us online.
Yeah.